from your investigation of constructive foreclosures by the banks, do you think these problems are systematic in the sector?
What we recommended in our small business loans inquiry was that the recommendations that we made with regard to timelines, non-financial default clauses and so on, would significantly improve things going forward if they were taken on board. What we did say, though, was that there was a group of cases that we'd had a look at, and I'm sure there were others as well, of past cases that did need another look, and FOS wouldn't be able to do that. That was when the minister responsible, Kelly O'Dwyer, extended the terms of reference for the Ramsay inquiry to have a look at what mechanism could be put in place to manage some of those past cases, and I think the Ramsay inquiry is still looking at that, and I think you've been talking to them just recently.
They'll be right. They've provided a final report on their original terms of reference that didn't include this. This was announced in February, and they'll be developing a new issues paper for the extended terms of reference, which will be, understand, coming out very shortly, and we'll be responding to that issues paper.
Just going back to the unfair contracts line of questioning. Ms. Carnell, you said that, what it takes is for a small business essentially to run a case, to take a matter to court. Do you have any powers or powers available to ASIC to pursue this as a systemic issue? What was the kind of stick you waved at the banks to make them voluntarily decide to write to all of these customers?
ASIC and we sat next to each other and said, we're as one. We don't believe you've complied. You've got to.
Yeah.
And ASIC, of course, does have the power.
Yeah.
Now we don't. That's fair.
Okay. I just didn't know if you did have. I didn't have your act here, so whether you could do something.
We don't have any. We don't have the powers to actually require the banks, or we don't have any arbitration capacity.
But obviously there was some mention of potential action that could be taken by ASIC should a voluntary correspondence exercise not be entered into.
I think both ASIC and us made it very clear that that would produce action.
Yeah.
And ASIC does have the power.
Yeah. Okay. But you could make life for them pretty difficult on this issue.
Yeah.
That would be the plan.
Yeah. Okay. No, and I've spoken to a number of small businesses who've had probably similar ones to the ones you've dealt with as part of your inquiry, who banks exercising those clauses prior to November have ruined small businesses through no fault of their own.
Yes, it's the reason that we made the call, and the government followed up by extending Ramsay's terms of reference. There is a group of these businesses that probably over the last 10 years, really, since the global financial crisis, when it actually got a whole lot worse, that really are in a pretty rotten position. Yeah,
with no avenues to pursue. So in terms of the Ramsay, I think you mentioned the last resort compensation scheme. Are you hoping to see that it has a broad, it's able to deal with cases such as those small businesses those individuals who've basically had their lives ruined through those various experiences, to be dealt with through that scheme?
That's what we asked. That was it wasn't one of the recommendations in our banking inquiry, but it was one of the. It was part of the executive summary that we believed that this was pretty important. I mean, the great dilemma for these businesses is, you'd have to be it would take a lot for a small business to take a bank on in court, but these guys are very distressed, in many cases
Yeah.
bankrupt, so they've got really nowhere to go at all, and that's not reasonable.
Have you requested for the warranty claim notices in relation to the Bankwest share sale deed?
No.
No.
No? And what would be required to get that information?
We are currently doing some more work on the CommBank Bankwest takeover when CommBank bought Bankwest. So we are in the process of doing a greater deep dive into that space. So we haven't left that particular issue. Craig's been doing some work on that.
Yeah, no, we're putting together a report to work in with ASIC and jointly hopefully just go forward and have a look at some of the behaviours in this area. And so we're noting quite a number of what you may well regard as systematic behaviours by the bank in order to be able to default loans. So, but that's still undergoing that process.
Will that be a public report?
We don't usually have things that aren't public, so I can't imagine why we wouldn't make it public. ASIC has looked at a number of the cases of CommBank Bankwest in the past, but they've looked at them separately. What we're looking at it is to determine whether there was systemic behaviours in that space, and what the reasons might be for that. And working with ASIC, remember ASIC's got the power.
Yeah. Okay, well, we might follow that up. Just in relation to the conversation we had around small business and looking at a last resort compensation scheme, many of the small businesses that that have come to me, and I think there's certainly the ones included in your report, many of their issues were with solvent organisations like the big four banks, in which case, how do you see a last resort compensation scheme applying for those people?
That's what Ramsey's been asked to look at. I think it's really quite a challenging thing to put together, because whatever it is, there's got to be able to direct compensation. In some cases, the compensation could be quite large. So it's got to have the power to be able to require the banks to pay. It's got to have the capacity to be able to look at quite complex cases, and and if it becomes a judicial inquiry, the whole basis will be taken out, because the moment it's barristers at 20 paces, these businesses aren't in the business. Well, they're not businesses anymore. They're often insolvent, are not in a position to be able to, to be able to put their case, because they don't have any money. So I think the challenge here is looking at the things that must be there, and that's that they can't be judicial, e.g., barristers. They need to be able to handle quite complex cases, and it needs to be able to direct compensation, and that's an unusual beast. The challenge here is you're going to need to go back a number of years, possibly, at least 8, maybe, more. And traditionally, FOS hasn't done that. But
the time limits normally rule it out. So it's time plus money limits.
Okay.
So it'll need to be something a little different.
Okay. It's interesting. I'll wait with that issues paper with interest.